Mother's Day weekend, Crossing Church. How are you doing? Are you doing all right? It's good to see you. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you've had an awesome weekend. This is the weekend that we celebrate Mother's Day, and it's just, it's an incredible experience. Those of you that are parents or even have had any type of opportunity to participate in the birth of a child, it's just such a joyous experience. It's such an exciting experience. All downhill from there, but it's great right then. And, it's appropriate that we're celebrating not only Mother's Day, but, it's about birth. It's about new birth. And this last week, we had 42 people that accepted Christ and were baptized. That's new birth. That's new birth. And we give God praise for that. That's so exciting, and it's coming at this time when we're starting to wind down or wind up, as the case may be, with the story of Jesus Christ, his story. Been digging down into it. I don't know how many of you are Jack Bauer fans, 24 fans, and of course that happened again this week. It started back up again this week. Some of you are excited about that, and I kind of feel like the clock's ticking in his story. It's like you see that in the background, just beep. It's getting closer and closer. And where we're picking up today is this one last time. Jesus is going to reason with those Jewish religious leaders. One more time, he's going to illustrate his mission's purpose. The problem with these Jewish religious leaders is manifold. There's a lot of them. But one big part of it is that what they believe in is really a health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. They really believe that if you live a certain way, then God's going to bless you, and you're going to be a healthy person, and you're going to have lots of money. And since they have lots of money, they're obviously the ones that God's been blessing. And people that are on the margins or people that are down and out, those people are obviously sinners, and they're a long way from God. We talked about that last week. And that's one of the reasons they really question Jesus and his whole ministry, because Jesus is targeting people that live on the margins. Jesus is targeting people that are down and out or up and out, people that are disconnected from the rest of culture. He's targeting those people, and they hate him for that because he loves the people that are outcast. He loves people that are lost. He loves people that are lost. How many of you, at all of our locations, how many of you heard the term lost as it applies to a person of faith or not having faith or not being saved? How many of you have heard that before? Yeah, and it's a term that some people might even take offense to. Like if a person's a Christian and they look at another person and they go, well, you're lost. I mean, a person who's not a Christian would kind of go, hey, well, you're calling me names. Why are you doing that? I want to explain to you today what that means, why we use the term lost. And it's when Jesus was trying to explain the very people he was coming to save. He uses that term. He uses the term lost. And he uses it in 3 illustrations. And by these 3 illustrations, he's trying to reason with these Jewish religious leaders, saying, here's why I've come. This is why I'm here. And he begins with the story of the lost sheep. So here it is, lost. What does it mean to be lost? Lost sheep. Jesus said, if there's a shepherd and he has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, won't he leave the 99 and go out and search for the one until he finds that one sheep, and then with joy and gladness, he brings that sheep back into the fold. Jesus is saying through this illustration that this is why he came. He came to find the sheep that were lost. Now, I don't know how many of you have any experience with sheep, but I'm just going to ask you a question. How do sheep get lost? How does that even happen? I don't think that sheep mean to get lost. I don't think they wake up in the morning and go, you know what I'm going to do today? Get lost. That's what I'm going to do, because lost is cool. I don't think sheep even think about it. I don't think they think about much of anything except maybe eating or being safe, and that's about it, right? So pretend that you're a sheep for a little bit, okay? And so if you're a sheep, and what are you doing? You kind of have your head down and you're eating grass. And as long as there's green grass in front of you, life is good. As long as there's water that's still, because troubled water scares you, but as long as there's water that's still, you're doing good. And so how would a sheep get lost? Well, he'd be eating some grass here, and then he'd say, well, there's some nice grass, and then he'd move forward, and then he'd go, well, there's some good grass over here, and then he'd eat there. And he might just be keeping his head down and just following wherever the grass is. And then all of a sudden he realizes, where's everybody else? I'm here out all by myself and the sun's going down. That's how sheep get lost. Guess what? That's how we get lost. I don't think that people get up in the morning and go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to sin really bad today. Because I'm just all about just dishonoring God. That's what I want to do. I just want to break every rule that's imaginable, because if there's a hell, I just want it to be as hot as possible when I go there. Do you think that people think that? Do you think that people intend to do that? Or do you think that people just wander off? I think a lot of people do that. And then one day they look up and they look around and they're going like, how did I get here? How did this happen? Because we're like sheep. We're just like sheep. That's how we get lost. You know what's beautiful about this story? And instead of rejecting this concept of being lost, I want you to embrace it. Because Jesus understands that we're sheep. And he understands that we get lost. And he takes it upon himself to go out and find us. Even if he's got 99 in the pen, he'll go out and find that one lost sheep. And so the idea of being lost is not one that you should push away, but embrace, because it's reminding you how much Jesus loves you. That he'd be willing to go and find you. You know, this is the first story that Jesus tells is 1 out of 100. There's 100 sheep, one of them gets lost. And so there's 99 back, and so it's 1 out of 100. And then Jesus takes it one step further, because, you know, a sheep to a shepherd is like property. It's like I own that sheep. It's like has value. But he takes it a step further, and he tells a second story. And the second story is about a woman who loses a coin. She has 10 coins, and she loses a coin. And she loses it in her house, and she starts going crazy, sweeping the house, trying to find the coin. And I mean, just, you know, calls her neighbors, got to be praying about this, help me find this coin, right? And she finally finds it. When she does, she is ecstatic, and she celebrates the fact that she finds that coin. Now, to understand the story, you need to understand a little bit about Jewish culture, because those coins, those 10 coins, are more than money to this woman. They're a symbol to her. Many times in Old Testament times and during the time of Christ, that was a symbol of your marriage. It was like your engagement ring. Those coins were on a necklace. They were worn by that woman. It was a symbol of a relationship that you had to your husband. And when that coin was lost, it would be like you, guys losing your wedding ring, or gals losing your engagement ring or your wedding ring, and you'd be frantic, wouldn't you, to find that. You know why? Because even though it's only a symbol, it has more. It means a lot more than just the value of the metal or the value of the diamond or whatever's in it. It has sentimental value. It's precious to you because it's a symbol of a relationship, and it's not replaceable. But its greatest value is defined by its owner. So when Jesus tells this story about being lost, and he's connecting that to people who are lost, what is he saying? He's saying, you're more than property to me. You're precious to me. There's a relationship here. It's very important that I find you. If you're lost, I want to find you. And you're worth more than just the fact that you're a person. I have a connection to you. But he's not done. You see, the first one was 1 of 100, and the second one was 1 of 10, right? But then he finishes with a third story about being lost. And the third story is about a lost son, and there's two sons. And one son, the older brother, stays home. The younger brother wants his inheritance early. We call this the story of the prodigal son. He wants his father's inheritance early. He leaves his father. He goes out. He spends it on what the Bible says is loose living until it's all gone. And he's in a distant land. And there's a famine that comes. And he's longing to, and he has to work with pigs. And if you're Jewish, that's about as bad of a job as you can have, right? Because you're not supposed to be even around pigs or even consider that. And it says that he was so destitute that he was longing to eat what the pigs ate. And that's when he said, the Bible says he came to himself. And he said, I know what I mean, even the servants in my father's house live better than this. I'll go back to my father. And I'll say, I'm not worthy to be called your son. But if you just make me a servant in your house, I'll be satisfied with that. And he started home. Jesus went on with the story, and he says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and ran to him and hugged him and kissed him. And the son had this cleverly prepared speech, but the father never let it come out of his mouth. He wouldn't hear any of it. He put his robe on him, put his ring on his finger, and said, my son was lost, but now he's found. He was dead, but now he's alive again. Killed a fatted calf. Let's throw a party. You know, the older brother had a real problem with that because he'd been home the whole time. The father went back to the older brother and said, you know, everything I have is yours. He did lose his inheritance. But you need to celebrate because your little brother was lost and now he's found. You know, that's the only time in the Bible it depicts God as running. And where's he running? Toward that lost son. You see, you belong to him. That's what the sheep tell you. And he'll come out and find you. You're precious to him. That's what the coins tell you. And he will search and he won't give up. He's tenacious because he wants to bring you home. And he loves you. As a father loves a son or a daughter. And that's what that one of two tells you. So we have to understand that lost is not a derogatory term. You know, when he saw Zacchaeus up in the tree, and he said, come on down, Zacchaeus, because I'm going to be eating lunch at your house today. He saw someone who was lost that needed to be found, and he loved him. When he saw the rich young ruler, he saw a person who was an up and outer, not a down and outer, and he saw him as lost. The Bible says he looked on him and he loved him. And when the rich young ruler couldn't or wouldn't submit to the authority of Jesus, Jesus let him go, but not without loving him first. Because we were all precious to him. I want to ask you a question. Are you lost? Every one of you, all of our locations, either are or were. It's a common denominator. We all own that. Every one of us was lost, or we are presently lost. And I want you to know that you can embrace that because someone's looking for you. No matter what location you're at, I want you to know that you're not here by accident. Because Jesus came, the Bible said, to seek and to save that which was lost. Well, you know what? Being lost has a conclusion. The reason that being lost is such a big deal is because it has a conclusion. And that conclusion is death. And that death is far worse than just not living, because we're more than mortal creatures. We have an eternal reality about us. There is an eternity that's waiting for us on the other side of death. And Jesus went from teaching about being lost and what that meant to teaching about the conclusion of being lost. He does it with a story. And the story is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. It's in Luke 16. I'm going to read verses 19 to 31. We're going to read this story together. We're going to take it apart. He says, there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In hell, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. Then he answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, and let him warn them, so that they do not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And he said to them, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. What do we learn from this story? Jesus is not just talking about being lost now. He's talking about the inevitable conclusion of being lost. This new reality once we pass over, once we die. There is a reality after death. Actually, the way that Jesus describes it, there are 2 realities after death. One of them is a wonderful reality, and one of them is a terrible reality. What we would understand as heaven and hell. What else we learn from this story is that the choices we make in this life determine our destination, where we're going to spend eternity. Because Abraham tells the rich man that, right? You had your good things, he had his bad things, but you know, this is how you live, this is how he lived. You've been judged by that, and that's why you're spending eternity where you are. The choices you make now will determine your future. That's what Jesus is teaching. And the third thing that I see in this story is that this rich man begs that someone would come back from the dead and warn his brothers. And as I look back in the rearview mirror and see this story, the reality is someone has come back from the dead, and people still don't believe. Jesus was speaking prophetically about what he was about to do. That he was going to die, be buried, come back from the dead, and even though he was going to do something that profound, people would not believe in him. Find that amazing. Don't you find that amazing? That Jesus has been here, God in the flesh has been here. He's proved himself to us, and still there's so many that don't believe him. He's come back from the dead, and still there's so many who do not believe in him. Now, this story is a little bit more poignant than that, and we can understand it in the description. Even though many of us in America today don't understand what Jesus was actually saying, if you were with Jesus during that time, you would have understood what he was saying. The description that he uses for the rich man is very specific. He lives behind a gate. He eats lavishly. He's very wealthy. He's dressed in purple. Do you know who he's talking about? He's not just making up a story. He's talking about Caiaphas. Caiaphas fits the description that Jesus is laying out in this story. Once again, Jesus is picking a fight. He's saying the high priest, he was the one who doesn't care about the poor. Remember what they're saying. Remember what all the Jewish religious leaders, and the head of all those leaders is the high priest. Remember what they're saying. They believe in a prosperity gospel, health and wealth and prosperity. And if you're not healthy and you're not wealthy and you don't prosper, that obviously means you're a sinner and God has rejected you. But Jesus is working with people on the margins, and he's working with the outcasts. And they are finding fault with him because of that. They think that he's bad because of that. What Jesus is doing is turning the tables. And he's saying, actually, you're the ones that are bad. Because you're not ministering to the people that are hurting. You're not ministering to the people that are outcast and on the margins. And this is how God's going to treat you. He's basically telling the high priest, this is where you're going to be spending eternity. That's pretty powerful. Well, I already asked you from the first point, are you lost? And then I answered it. You either are or you were. My second question to you is this. What choice have you made? Because those choices mean things. What we do in this life determines our future. And ultimately, it's what did you do with Jesus Christ? What choice have you made? Because the choice that you make is going to determine your future. And if you've not chosen Jesus, if you've chosen yourself, if you've chosen selfish things, let me tell you something. Today is a time for a new choice. Today is a time for what was lost to be found. Because there is an eternal reality at stake. Then Jesus illustrates it. This is my third point. Jesus illustrates the choice that we have. And do you know how he does it? This is how he does it. He gets word that Lazarus, a friend of his, isn't that interesting that his name's Lazarus and he just used a person named Lazarus as an illustration? His friend Lazarus, who has two sisters, Mary and Martha, is sick. He finds out that he's sick, but instead of rushing to his side to heal him before anything worse befalls him, he allows him to die. He even tells his disciples, we're not going back until after he's dead, so that they can see the glory of God. So he waits, takes his time. And by the time he gets back to Bethany, which is just a little south of Jerusalem, Lazarus is dead. He's not dead, just dead. He's really dead. Okay? He's not just mostly dead. He's like all the way dead. You know why I'm saying that? Because, Jesus raised Jairus' daughter. Remember that? How long had she been dead? Just a little bit, right? And you remember when he raised the boy that was on his way to the cemetery? I mean, he'd been dead a little bit longer, but not that much longer. Not like a whole day. So he was like, one was barely dead, and one was only mostly dead. How you doing? You doing okay? But Lazarus was really dead. Like, he was so dead that he'd been buried and in a tomb for 4 days, and when Jesus went to the cemetery, he said, roll the stone away, and they went, you don't want to do that. Because this dude is really, really dead. Dead. And of course, you know the story. We talked about it a couple weeks ago, where he meets the sister on the road, and the sister is crying, and she's brokenhearted. And if you had only been here, Jesus, my brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus said this, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, even though he were dead, yet shall he live. And a person who lives and believes in me will never die. And then he looks at her and he goes, do you believe this? And she's trying to figure out what in the world that even means. And Jesus is looking at you today, and he's pointing his finger at you, and he's going, do you believe this? He says those same words to you. Do you believe this? You got to ask yourself that question, because that is the choice that you're making. That is the choice that determines your eternal destiny. I want you to see what he says. Let's break it down even farther. He says, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes what? He doesn't say if you believe me. He who believes me. He says he who believes. That little word in is a really important word. Jesus isn't saying, I want you to believe me. He's saying, I want you to believe in me. There's a lot of people that believe Jesus, but they don't believe in Jesus. Let me tell you what that means. You know, you could go up to a lot of people and they'd say, well, who do you think Jesus is? And they'll say, well, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus came to earth, blah, blah, blah. But you don't see a life that reflects that truth. Because they might believe Jesus, but they don't believe in Jesus. That word "in" is signifying relationship. I'm in relationship with him. I believe in him. Now, when you say you are in him, how do you get into Jesus? I'm just going to say this like really simply. I mean, he has to be bigger and you have to be smaller. And if you're going to fit into Jesus, you got to be small. And he's got to be big. And you probably think that's dumb. But that's really profound. Let me tell you. You have to get smaller and he has to get bigger. Are you hearing me? He's got to be the priority. You've got to be the minority. And you have to ask yourself right now, is that true in my life? Is he more important? Is his agenda more important than my agenda? You see, a lot of people, they kind of want to have this as an addition in their life. Like, I've got a great life. I'd just like to add Jesus to my collection. And Jesus is like, no, I don't fit into your collection. I've got to be the priority in your life or I can't be anything at all. I'm not here to be the minority. I'm not here to be just something that's added. I've got to be what's central in your life. Are you, and this is my next question, are you in him? I've asked you 3 questions now. Number 1, are you lost? I answered it for you. Either are or you were. Second question I asked was, what choice have you made? And if you haven't made that choice for Jesus yet, it's not too late to make that choice. My third question is, are you in him? Now, you know the rest of that story. Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus comes out of that tomb. And he was all the way dead. And he became all the way alive. And that's a pretty big deal. If a guy can do that. Just saying. So, can you imagine how Mary felt? Lazarus' sister. Can you imagine how Martha felt? So what are you going to do? What do you do after you've been having this big funeral and you got the whole family in for the funeral and all of a sudden the person that it's all about isn't dead anymore? Now what do? Well, you throw a party. That's what you do. You throw a party. And that's what they did. They threw a party. And there were so many people that wanted to come to that party, they couldn't have it at Lazarus, Mary, and Martha's house. Just wasn't big enough, so they found another guy. And do you know who the guy they found was? His name was Simon the leper. Who wants to have a dinner party at the house of Simon the leper? Yum. What are we going to have? Chicken McNuggets? Well, I mean, what? Gross. You know what's awesome is that Simon the leper, that's his name. It's in the Bible, Simon the leper. It means that Jesus had healed this guy that was a complete outcast. You talk about on the margins, he's an outcast. But not anymore. Not anymore. That had defined him. It defined him. That is always connected to his name when we read it. Simon the leper, but he's not a leper anymore. And everybody wants a ticket to the celebration at Simon the leper's house. And why wouldn't you? Because Simon the leper is going to be there, except he's not a leper anymore. And there's another guy that's going to be there named Lazarus, who was dead for 4 days and reconstituted. Like a rotten body reconstituted. It would be pretty cool to be at that dinner party, I'm just telling you. That would be awesome. And in the middle of that dinner party, and they have this big dinner party, and it's a big celebration, everybody's happy, and in the middle of that, here comes Mary. Mary, Lazarus' sister, she comes out, and she's got something in her hands. And nobody's really noticing what she's got in her hands. It's kind of small, it's white. And what it is an alabaster jar of pure nard. What nard is, it's made from the spikenard plant. It's super expensive. Like a little jar would take you a whole year to earn enough money to buy one little jar of this stuff. It was a perfume that was used for burial. So when your body started to rot and smell, when you were first buried, they would put this ointment on you. They would rub it on your newly dead body so that it would overpower. It's so strong, the fragrance is so strong, it would overpower even the smell of rotting flesh. And during that time, before there was any kind of thing like embalming, this was really important stuff. And this is what Mary does with this. I mean, this is like something that would cost like $50,000, okay? This little, I mean, even the jar it's in is precious. It's made of alabaster. It's precious. She breaks it open. It's sealed. She breaks it open and she pours it over Jesus' head. Like, uses it all up. Some people would say she wastes it on Jesus. This is so powerful to me. You know why she anointed him with it? I'm sure that was for Lazarus. But she didn't need it anymore because Lazarus wasn't dead anymore. Because death didn't matter anymore. And it didn't matter anymore because Jesus was there. She understood now. She didn't understand before she made it to the cemetery with Jesus, but after the cemetery she did. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, even though he were dead, yet shall he live. And a person who lives and believes in me will never die. And she looked at that so valuable jar of pure nard, and she said, compared to Jesus and my relationship to Jesus, this doesn't even matter anymore. This doesn't even matter anymore. And I wonder how many of us today would say, because Jesus Christ has come into my life, all of these things that used to matter so much to me, that used to be so important to me, they just don't matter anymore. And things that used to not matter to me at all, now they matter more than anything else. Because when you are in Jesus Christ, your world turns upside down. And the things that used to matter, they just don't. And the things that didn't matter, now they do. And I'm wondering how many of us need that to flip like it did for Mary. I wonder how many of us need to have a response to Jesus like Mary has. This was Jesus in his mission. He came to seek and to save that which was lost, and he defined what that meant. And that's not a derogatory term. He loves us, and being lost, he comes to find us. He wants us to understand that being lost has an inevitable conclusion. There is a hereafter, and the stakes are very high. He illustrates that with Lazarus, that he has the power to raise us even from death. And of course, he proved that by rising from the dead himself. And there's only one way to respond to that. And that is to, when I give my heart to him, the things that used to matter, they just don't anymore. And the things that never mattered, now they matter more than ever. I wonder how you'd be answering these questions right now. We're moving to a time of decision.